Who's here from Camp 4? Let's hear it. You can do better than that. Come on, who's here from Camp 4?
I walked through.
I salute you. What you're going to see is a few slides of change over 50 years. I was absolutely amazed tonight. We were having dinner here in the mountain room, and we were introduced to our waiter, and it took us 5 days to get to the top. And Ben said, "Oh, that was a wonderful climb." And I said, "Well, how long did it take you?" He said, 5 hours. The world has changed. About 2 months ago, my wife Sandy and I were sitting in the patio, and it just dawned on me it was 50 years. And I picked up the phone and called Royal and Mike. And if that had stopped there, we wouldn't be here tonight. But Mike has a wonderful daughter, Janine, and Janine's a cheerleader, and she called Linda, and I don't know who else, and we're here tonight, and thank you to all of you. What you're going to see now is the story of 4 teenagers and a 30-year-old surveyor named Warren Harding. It begins in the early 50s, and I'll introduce you to the players. First slide. Here you see Royal Robbins in the modern climbing gear of that era. I want you to notice the Converse All-Star tennis shoes. And then there is the proper Army mountain pants and the proper khaki shirt. The rope, you notice, is around his shoulder, all neatly coiled the way that the 10th Army Mountain Division recommended that you coil a rope. Next player. Here we have Don Wilson. Don Wilson was a biology student at USC and Royal's early climbing companion. I met the two of them at Talk Eats, and we hit it off well. And so now, teenager 3 is standing before you in the red hat. We climbed together at Talk Eats, and it was very clear that we aspired to do more, better things. And so, in 1953, we were climbing here in the valley in the early summer, and we looked up from LeConte Lodge, and there it was. And we said, you know, that's really where we ought to be going. This was our inspiration. Next slide. So that following summer, Don Wilson and I hiked to the top of Half Dome and began taking photos. And here's one of the photos we brought back to Royal. And those of you who've looked down from the notch will recognize the lower face. Very clearly, this was climbable. Next slide. Here's a picture of the midsection of the face. And we recognized it was climbable as well, but there was very definitely a gap. How did you get from one side to the other? That would be the first real problem, we believe. Next slide. But then there was the upper face, and we couldn't really get a good view of that, with the exception perhaps of this photo, and we knew that that would truly be the crux. Next slide. Well, in the intervening time, we met a fellow by the name of Warren Harding. And how many of you know Warren? Huh? Warren was a character of the First Order, a very amiable person, a very, very strong climber. And Don and I met him here in the valley, and he had a surveying assignment in San Diego. So he came down to Talk Eats Rocks, where he and Royal met, and they hit it off wonderfully well. Warren had been looking at the northwest face as we had, and the chemistry was right, the proposal was made, and we arrived in the valley in 1955 to make this attempt on the northwest face. Now, it's very interesting. Look back for a minute. Switch back, Linda, for a minute. Look at these 4 individuals. On one side, you have Warren Harding with his arms crossed. He looks kind of disgusted, doesn't he? On the other side, you have Don Wilson with his hands on his hips. I'm in control. Then you have these two meat guys standing in the middle. Well, the story will unfold. Next slide. Here we have a picture of Royal on the second day, and you'll recognize that we're not very far up. We only got about 450 feet. And you're looking up, of course, at the face itself. And there became some tension in the group. Warren, as you know, wanted to go forward at all costs. And Don was a light and fast guy and kind of in control. And those of you who have read Downward Bound, who's read Downward Bound? Warren's book. Well, right there, Warren says, you know, I'm not used to being the junior member of the team, and this guy, Don Wilson, pissed me off. Those were his words. Those are quotes, you see. And you can see that, of course, in the slide where you saw the four of us. Next slide. So after 2.5 days and about 450 feet, we headed down. And the most discouraging part of that whole adventure was we chose a wrong route. And Royal spent about 5 hours the first day getting maybe a couple of hundred feet. And when we went down, when we rappelled down, and those of you who've been on the North Face will recognize this picture, here is this wonderful chimney. And when we went back in 1957, we climbed up it in probably less than 30 minutes. But that had drained Royal on the 1955 attempt and had dampened all of our spirits. And so after 2.5 days, we headed down. Next slide. Well, the word got out, and the Saturday Evening Post sent a team, a reporter and a photographer to Yosemite and asked us to be here in September or October of that year because they wanted to do a story on climbing in Yosemite. And here you see the four of us, and we had developed a very strong relationship at that time with the chief ranger, who was very supportive of what we were doing and for which we were most grateful. And here you see the four of us with Half Dome in the background, apparently signing in. Well, it was a staged picture, of course, for Saturday Evening Post. Next slide. And then, of course, we had to go up and get another picture of Half Dome. And you can see the demeanor of the individuals. You can see the showman. Who recognizes the showman? Who's the showman? It's Bat Harding, isn't it? All right. Next slide. Warren always liked a good show, particularly when he was a star. And here you see a couple of staged pictures up on Sentinel Dome. Next slide. Well, in February that year, the article was published in Saturday Evening Post. Next slide. And here it was. They risked their lives for fun. Now, all of a sudden, climbing in Yosemite was a national issue, and that following June, there was an issue in the Holiday magazine which only amplified things with that wonderful picture of Salifay and Anton Nelson on the top of the Lost Arrow. So all of a sudden, climbing in Yosemite is a nationally recognized sport. Next slide. Well, there was no action in 1956. And there was no action because Royal was working at the bank. Don and I had looked at the desert spires, and we went off to climb with Mark Powell, Spider Rock and the Totem Pole and Cleopatra's Needle and various other things. And Warren was on a surveying assignment in Alaska. Next slide. Well, I had a call from Royal in May of 1957, and he said, Warren's coming back from Alaska. And we knew immediately that that meant that Warren was going to come back to climb the face, and he was based in Sacramento, and that meant Warren would be here every weekend until Half Dome was climbed. So Royal and I agreed to meet at our favorite coffee shop in Idlewild, and we discussed it that Saturday morning and said, we better move. And we said, you know, we need a third member. Who should it be? And we both climbed with Mike Sherrick and agreed totally. So Royal's assignment was to convince Mike to join us, and my assignment was to get the gear together. And now I give you our colleague and friend of more than 50 years, Mike Sherrick, to tell you about the 1957 Ascent. Mike?
Thank you. Thanks, everybody. Welcome to this celebration. Yeah. We're celebrating many things, not the least of which, despite the